What is a secret your parents hid from you that turned out to be very important? The fact that my grandfather had a heart attack that almost killed him. This was only admitted by my grandmother when my dad had a heart attack that almost killed him. Later my uncle had a heart attack that actually killed him. And my aunt began suffering from heart issues as well. There's a good chance heart disease runs in our family, so knowing this is definitely very important. Never met my dad. Turns out he was a schizophrenic drug addict. Guess who's schizophrenic now? That my doctor diagnosed me with an ibuprofen allergy as a baby. Learned it for myself after a fun ER visit in my early 20s. My dad was molested by his mom and she let random dudes bully and beat him up for their entertainment. I didn't know about this until she died, but it makes perfect sense why my dad is such a piece of shit. My parents didn't tell me about my cerebral palsy diagnosis until I was 13, even though I was diagnosed around 18 months. I'm really mildly affected obviously, but it's become far more important as an adult as I have health issues, need to exercise in an adapted environment, have a slight learning disability that makes aspects of college hard, and can't drive due to my condition. When I told my mom that I had horrible depression and I needed treatment or I would fail out of college, she said, "Well, I'm not surprised. We're all taking antidepressants." Mom, this would have been useful information to have before college. That my mom became effectively permanently mentally ill from her pregnancy with me, bipolar disorder, paranoia, possibly paranoid schizophrenia. One of my parents casually mentioned a mental health condition that the other had been diagnosed with before I was born that nobody had mentioned to me ever in my life even though I was pushing 30. Finding that out made some things click. Dang, these are deep. I was just gonna say that Santa wasn't real. My mother told me casually last year that years ago when she was married to her second husband, that was when I was 12, she called the police on him once because he threatened her and refused to let her leave, and the SWAT team surrounded the house demanding to release her. I was so shocked about this information and wanted to more, but she was like, "Meh, it's not that important," and she ended the conversation. I guess it's important to me to see the stuff my mom put up with him before she left him. I had a brother that only lived 12 hours. He was 2 years younger than me, so I didn't remember until they told me when I was 10. Years later, I found out his birthday was the same day as my next-door neighbor's. My parents had chosen to hide their painful remembrance and emotions so that I was able to enjoy 6 or 7 birthday parties in the neighborhood before we moved. Just found out yesterday that my family is more susceptible to getting blood clots in your legs, which can then travel to your lungs. My grandma had a problem with it. My uncle died from it, and I only found out because my dad died yesterday from it. My aunt just happened to mention that they all take baby aspirin to prevent it. Fuck, I wish I would've known that sooner. That I had an older half-sister who was given up for adoption. My mom had to tell me because she turned up on the doorstep one day. At the age of 12, we'd been the typical mom, dad, and 2 kids family. By the time I was 15, my parents had divorced and remarried, and I now had a sister, 2 half-sisters, 2 half-brothers, and a stepsister. When I was a junior in high school, my mom and I got into a low-speed accident with minor damage to both vehicles. Later that month, I was so exhausted from school that I decided to ditch. I drove on the back roads for 10 minutes, then parked, and then slept. My mom found out and was furious at me. I lied and said that it was because I wasn't feeling good and I had headaches, and some BS like that. She took me to the doctor and they found that my C3 vertebrae was fractured on top of having a tumor growing on it. I ended up having a gnarly 10-hour spinal surgery that honestly completely changed the course of my life. And we only found out about it because I couldn't think of any other bullshit excuse to use. My autism diagnosis wasn't told until after I was having my own children assessed. My mom is also autistic, that was obvious, but she always denied breast cancer being something that runs in the family, and that my great uncle was a convicted pedophile. I was only told when my own son was 2, because his targets were young boys, so I didn't need to know before then. I no longer have any contact with that side of the family. My mom raised me in a pretty aggressive Christian household. When we finally got TV, I discovered HBO had like a 5-minute preview of movie shows whatever. Then I saw the late night shit. Well, our TV was locked down with a passcode. I had to be like 11 or 12, but I put a VHS and then hit record. I then told my mom that I wanted to watch an animal documentary, but it was locked TV 14 for the animal violence. Well, she had me turn around while she scrolled the password in. After she left for work, I rewinded the VHS and got the password. Sorry, Mom. I was diagnosed with autism at 5 and wasn't told until I was 25. Would have saved me a lot of therapy trips if I'd have known that sooner. My uncle, grandfather, and grandmother were alcoholics on my dad's side. 2 died from it. They told me after years of drinking took me to my first 30-day inpatient rehab. They told me on visitation day. I can't say knowing any sooner would have given me a different outcome, but a heads up would have been appreciated. 7 years sober now, get help if you or anyone you know has an addiction. Edit. I have one 2.5-year daughter and shall be told when she gets older. My brother was shot and killed in Koreatown as a result of gang violence. Didn't find out until 2 years later. My mother hid the identity of my father from me for 35 years. I don't look like her. I don't act like her. I look like a taller, less olive version of him. My personality is like a carbon copy of him. He died 3 years before I knew who he was. I don't know what I would have done with the information if he were still alive. But I still feel extremely slighted because half of my identity was withheld. I haven't really talked to anyone about this.